I am Mwata Kairi, Dr. Kevin Washington, and we are doing the Pan-African Leadership Center, where we discuss various topics that impact the African world from a very intellectual, but also a practical standpoint. We bring in people that have an expertise in understanding the African condition and how to use it to elevate the African purpose and to move the African genius to a new level. This is the brainchild of Daniel Mabwonu of Nairobi, Kenya. This is the Pan-African Leadership Center. And today we have with us Dr. T. Owens Moore, a brother who I know as a scholar at Morehouse University, as he was the department chair. He has moved all over the country, doing great and wonderful things currently at Clark Atlanta University in the United States. He is a preeminent scholar of understanding the impact and the power of melanin. So we will talk about melanin and its influence on African consciousness. But we also talk about the issue of African consciousness and how it impacts the entire world. So I'm going to bring in Dr. Moore, and he will tell you about who he is and what he does. And once you hear about him, I am sure that you will be as impressed with him as I am. I'm honored to call him my brother from another. But I want to also note that I call him a colleague and someone I truly admire tremendously. Dr. Moore, let people know around the world, those who don't know, about the powerful work that you're doing and who you are in this space of African reality.
Well, Hotep, my brother, I thank you for this opportunity to speak with you. You and your crew have created this platform to reach the world, to make some changes. So it's an honor to be in this presence and this opportunity to kind of share my, background and my knowledge on the topic of melanin and African consciousness. For me, I'm trained as a biological psychologist, but I didn't start out that way. I just started as a brother from the hood, just like, we all are, not knowing too much about our history and our culture. So I, as a student in graduate school, I started to try to put things more together about this topic on melanin. But then prior to graduate school, I was in undergraduate school. And so with this platform here, then with the Pan-African Leadership Center, Pan-Africans, I went to Lincoln University in Pennsylvania. So when you ask about, who am I? Well, I'm from Pennsylvania. I went to Lincoln University in Pennsylvania, and a great Pan-Africanist went to Lincoln University. I'm not sure you've heard of Kwame Nkrumah. So Africa must unite. And that's what you're talking about on this platform. So Kwame Nkrumah, Nnamdi Azikiwe, these are Pan-Africanists that came over to the United States and went to the HBCUs. So didn't really understand the importance of that as a undergraduate student. But then as we moved on and we went to graduate school, we become a little bit more diversified in our understanding about what's going on in politics. So I left there, went to Howard University. And in Howard University, I was able to dialogue with colleagues from all over the planet, really, and had opportunity to, course through Dr. Welsing's work, Dr. Frances Cress Welsing, and she's talking about the ISIS papers and this Cress theory of color confrontation, and the whole topic of melanin kept coming up. And my area is biological psychology. So I said, well, let me explore this a little bit further, a little deeper. And then that's when I started getting into the brain. And so in 1995, I wrote a book called The Science of Melanin, Dispelling the Myths, wrote that with Beckham House Publishers. And that was my primer, not as the only book out there, but it was a book to put things in perspective about the importance of melanin, not just in our skin, but in our brain and in our organs, and how really it's connected to the cosmos. I mean, there's a reason why nature is very important to us as a people. So then I went ahead and wrote another book called Dark Matters, Dark Secrets. I went a little bit more into the brain, a little bit more into the pineal gland, and the issue of drug effects. So I wrote that 2002. So when we fast forward life, there's a crew. Heard of Richard King, African Origins of Biological Psychiatry. You
Yes.
heard of Ann Brown, Sister Ann Brown, Dr. Ann Brown. She's retired from Medgar Evers College. And then Brother Bruce Bynum, Edward Bruce Bynum, wrote African Unconscious. We all put together this document called Why Darkness Matters, the Power of Melanin in the Brain. And we actually revised that and have that out right now.
Yes.
For a new version much better than what was on Amazon, because that whole Amazon piece can be a little game. So we need to be able to control our work and our publications. 2 years ago, I wrote a book called Pigment Power, topics on melanin science and health, to go a little bit more further in terms of updated research on what's really happening with this topic and the story on melanin. And the reason why I was writing all this is because we need to understand us as a people. As I've traveled the world and seen where we are, we're in trouble. But why are we in trouble? Because we have this self-hate. We have this hatred for ourselves because we've been taught that blackness and color is bad. No, it's beautiful. Without pigment, you don't have any power. From the food items we can consume and eat to our bodies without it. And we see all of this global warming with the sun shining and now destroying certain things in the environment. Guess what? Your melanin becomes your power to maintain. So for me, I have an opportunity to teach. You said I went to Morehouse University. Actually, it's Morehouse College. And it's interesting because at Morehouse College, I taught your brother. What? That's why I say we kind of like brothers from another mother, like, right? So I got a chance to teach your brother at Morehouse College. I left there, went to Clark Atlanta University. I've also been at Fayetteville State University. So now I'm back in the Atlanta University Center, providing some knowledge for the people. And some of the topics we'll discuss today, I get a chance to speak to the students about in the classroom.
Brother, thank you so much. You're right. It is Morehouse College. We have this effect sometimes when we go places, we actually change the names. The day that Bethune-Cookman College became a university, I was actually speaking on that college campus. So maybe the university's on this way. It actually had been put in motion, but it was amazing how they unveiled the big banner. So I wanted to delve into this work. So you are an accomplished author talking about this idea of melanin and how we actually grow up learning to hate our pigment, and that really is where the power is. I love the title, Pigment Power. Speak more about this idea of self-hatred and how, as we deal with this idea of self-hatred, how we move away from our true power.
Well, we know from our jegnas that have come before us, like Dr. John Henry Clark talked about, powerful people do not teach powerless people how to take their power away from them. So the only way you can create an environment where those people don't have any power is to make them hate themselves, make them despise themselves. So we're not even going to use and say the enslavement process or slavery. No, we were imprisoned. Our minds have been shackled, incarcerated. So we're stuck on thinking nothing but bad about Black people. So when we don't have our own venues such as this to put out information that portrays us in a positive manner, can't win. Become brainwashed. I think I got a book up here called Brainwashed by Tom Burrell. So our inferiority has been generated. So it's up to us to redefine that. And you, as a past president of ABPSI, or the Association of Black Psychologists, in your work, you have something called PEST, was it POST? What's PEST stand for?
Persistent enslavement, systemic trauma.
So that's what we're dealing with. And we've been told that we're nobody. And now when we start to look that we are somebody, other people fear that. It's not a matter of talking about superiority and we're better than other people. No, it's about understanding your magnificence. And you can only understand that when you know yourself. That's why when you go to Africa, you go to the temples and you see it on the top, written in the middle of the Torah, know thyself. They knew that way back then. They understood blackness. Kemet means what? Land of the blacks. So for us as an African people, and as I got a chance to travel the world, and then we go back to Africa, you see sometimes with that colonialized or colonized education, many people don't know about our history, don't know about our culture. So in the midst of describing the importance of melanin and pigmentation, we have to talk about history. And our history has been, shoveled and piled on with dirt. So we now must uncover that. And that's what we do as Black psychologists.
Powerful. You said something about incarceration. We often use the languaging of enslavement and all other things. In reality, this idea of being prisoners of war and incarceration. And I have never seen a single, and I work with several brothers that have been incarcerated, sisters. I've never seen them go back with a great degree of pride and say, this is where I used to make bags or make pens or desks when they go back to the prison. They never go back to the prison like that. Like this is a place of pride and dignity. We have this relationship with our space of incarceration as if it is some place to adorn. In reality, when we recognize that we're prisoners of war, that changes the entire conversation. And the war for what? And one of the things is to capture and utilize our power for the economic gain and other gains that populations can get. And so we don't have that gain. And so this is why your work is just profound, because it talks about melanin and the power. The book Dark Matters, I think, is powerful because it has even the metaneta of the what the Europeans call hieroglyphs on the cover, showing that this is an ancient conversation about the sun, the what we consume, and our divine power. And this is a thing that I think that is imperative for the Europeans or the others to make us despise our divine power, divinity, while at the same time they use our divinity for the
Right.
economic gain. And then we have the issue of white money, white finances, black labor. And so but speak more to that, because right now I'm getting excited because people are speaking to us all around the world from Nigeria. We get in of course, the greetings. We get in Wow, great. Sister said that she needs to share this information with the African Union group, and so people are really getting charged about the contents. So share about this idea
Yeah.
of how
Well,
ancient this is. Mm.
yeah, and just that whole issue idea, our ideas have been incarcerated. So when we say conceptual incarceration, we're really saying that people's mindsets have been locked in the way that white people have told you to think about yourself. The only way to get out of that is to start reading and having information and knowledge. So books become weapons. I mean, I'm excited. There's a brother named Chike Akua. He's got a book called Honoring Our Ancestral Obligations. And in one of the chapters, he has both you quoted and me quoted. Well, this brother is also a teacher transformer. So just the opportunity for us to start redefining things and reclaiming who we are becomes the start. And most people are scared to start. Why? Because people living in fear. So beyond us being incarcerated and living in fear, look at the opposition. They know that you cannot be inferior. If you were so inferior, then they wouldn't have to create laws to keep you back. They know that is when I say they. The opposition knows the power within you. That's why they don't want you organized. When I say about Kwame Nkrumah, we talk about Nnamdi Ezekwe, all the Pan-Africanists that came before us as we're talking today, they were talking about uniting. Well, how do you unite when your mind is fragmented? So we as psychologists do whatever we can to get people to start thinking in the positive direction, to start looking at how do we coalesce. So as we're speaking, and people are from the Congo to Gambia to, Kenya. I mean, the brother said Daniel deals with Mind Matters. Got a book called Mind Matters, a resource guide to psychiatry for Black communities, a Black mental health, unapologetic guide to Black mental health. We must navigate our minds through this mess that we've been dealing with.
Wow.
You can't count on anybody else. I mean, Mwata Kairi. Mwata Kairi helped, start this festivity we have called Kwanzaa, but he talks about the white man is guilty for what we are not. We are responsible for what we ought to be. So we must take the time to read. And as I tell my students, how are you going to tell your children to read when you're not reading? There becomes the start to what opening your mind and becoming uncarcerated.
I told y'all, this brother, preeminent scholar, he just pulls out book after book, reading, delving into the idea of African consciousness. Witness Fankamo says self-hate is, I want you to get your comment on this. Self-hate is mental retardation, and it is influenced by the white supremacy agenda, and that is the lack of our own mental foundation institutes. Look, we are dependent on the oppressor's money, and his money is our submission, and that is an illness that can only be fixed by uplifting the consciousness of the conscious Africans ourselves. We must fund ourselves. The problem is that we depend on the oppressor's funding. Hashtag
Mm.
the Arbalequian. Or Kebalanin. So what do you think about that? You say that we are dependent. Go ahead.
Yeah, but this platform is the start to become independent. Without these platforms, we're not going to be able to be free. So you said you want to talk about the Uhuru movement and what happened there with Omwali Yeshitali and what happened with the government attacking that black organization that also has white people in it. It's not like white people and black people can't work together, but the mission has to be for freedom, not for some people to still control you while you so-called getting your chance to be free. So the government attacked that black organization, and for those that are outside of America, they don't know about COINTELPRO, about the government's counterintelligence program to ensure we don't have any black connections between those on the continent and those on the United States, primarily the United States, because COINTELPRO dealing with the counterintelligence program from here. But when you start linking up, you start making connections and now putting your money in your own circle, that's what the European powers and now we get the Asian powers fear. Asia's all up in Africa right now. Asia's all up in South America right now. Those people who are megalomaniacs or wanting to control the world and dominate, they're putting their money in resources. Africa has all the resources. We've been told to look away from Africa. You're scared to talk about Africa. Scared to talk about blackness. But non or melanin recessive people all up in Africa taking the resources. From the days of what King Leopold and what is his name? What's his name? Cecil Rhodes. From those days to the day now what China's now or doing in on the continent. So certainly there's some development going on, but what is behind the development? Because we see all the storylines about the problems with the cultural disconnect between those foreigners coming into the black community and dictating what should be happening, what should be done. So
Right.
until we are in that position from platforms like this, it's not going to happen.
So this is an act of self-determination, you say right now, that counters what Money was saying. Very good. So we do have to do more around the resource development. Chike Akua just came back from Ghana, and last week a week ago, so we had Joshua Mapanga out of Zimbabwe. He talks about the same thing about how do we control our economic wealth, and so we've also had Brother Chike here with us, and so he's talked about the issue of education and enlightenment and human transformation. And you're right. The resources of the world, the tea that the Queen drinks today in England has come probably from Madagascar, from the continent. The cocoa conversation. Hershey's chocolate makes in 1/4 what the country of Ghana will make in an entire year on cocoa. So, and there has been a controlled conversation just this week about how they're going to control the economics of that because the cocoa prices can be regulated at the docks, but there's never been a reduction in the cost of a chocolate candy bar in the United States. So they suppress what they will pay for cocoa, but they never change what they will how much they charge. Also, the same thing for coffee. So these things are transformative pieces. But the point is that the wealth of the world primarily comes from the continent, coltan and tantalite, and so forth and so on that makes the cell phones operate. And so these things are important to know. Dr. Dia Flager says that yes, conceptual incarceration. Let's reclaim who we are. She's also one of the administrators with Black Mental Health Matters. Folks, y'all see this brother reaches back, pulls the books out. A scholar talked about our various scholars and talked about Edward Bruce Bynum, talked about Richard King, he talked about Barbara Brown. He talked about these scholars. Also, he's alluded to, of course, Dr. Wade Nobles, and we've mentioned those scholars before. And what's happening around us. It is imperative for us to know to do the work. He talked about the counterintelligence program, COINTELPRO, a project that was designed to disrupt the economic and intellectual development of a population. And also talked about the Uhuru movement that was accused of being associated with Putin and Russia because Russia is somehow deemed to be the one person's enemy, and so the question is, are they joined together? This is the same thing that happened with our various scholars when they started the Greek letter organizations back in the day in the 20s, so forth, when they deemed that any African or Black person that was talking about Black consciousness was tied to this idea of communism. So the conversation is old, but the attack is on the powerful. And when we recognize the power, and this is where you are, recognize the power that's within, then we can move forward. So, but talk about this idea of the Uhuru movement, just going in and just wreaking havoc on the Black community just because.
Yeah, I want to, as we go into the issue of E in economics, because that will tie into what we're talking about right now. So you heard of Walter Rodney, right? Walter Rodney wrote how Europe underdeveloped Africa. And then Walter Rodney's book, how Europe underdeveloped Africa. We can't look at Africa as backwards. It's backwards because somebody made it backwards. Africa has all the resources. So economically, economics, we need to start studying those realms where we have not been in. So here in America, for those that don't know, we have then how capitalism underdeveloped Black America. That's by Manning Marable. So there's documents, there's resources that explain why we seem to be going backwards. So rather than playing basketball on all these ball games, we need to look at ways that we can now study economics, study metallurgy, study architecture, study things that deal with building, not ball games, because we get sucked into doing these things that are we're fantastic at psychomotor skill development. We talk about it in Melanin. We can do all those things from soccer, football to basketball, running, track, but we need to translate that to what we need to do to build pyramids again, to what create and build again. So when we deal with this Uhuru movement and what happened where they got attacked, look at the scenario of this. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. What does that mean? What are we talking about? Russia really has not been an enemy to Africa. Russia helped fund some of those movements for independence. So the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Russia, Cuba. Cuba can't be an enemy to Black people. Cuba with Castro, there's got some Black problems in Cuba. I don't know if you ever heard of Carlos Moore. Wrote a book called Pichon. He also wrote a book called Castro and the Blacks. So Castro and the Blacks, I mean, there's some challenges with Black people anywhere, but Cuba was on the side of the African countries for independence. So we're talking about a scenario where we need to look at these places that are not bad and enemies to Black people. That's why then this platform becomes important, because places like Venezuela is not bad to Black people, but the way the government here in the United States pushes that, they're like, that's the enemy. No. Hugo Chavez, if you did not know what he did for oil, for Africa, Haiti, even the United States, Citgo gas company, helped to provide funding for those people who were less advantaged or disadvantaged. So we can't look at all these enemies of the United States as our enemies, because some of them have been at the forefront of helping us gain our independence and our freedom. And so the attack on the Uhuru movement was some trumped up charges saying that, they were dealing with Russia. Like Russia's the problem. Like when the reality is the United States is doing the same thing that Russia has been doing. When you look at the African countries that have been attacked by the United States under a Black man's watch, a Black leader was killed in Africa. I'm sure you know the name, Libya. Muammar Gaddafi. Muammar Gaddafi was giving money to this Nation of Islam years ago. The United States government said, don't you take that money. Wow, they got enough power to tell an organization, don't take some money from a foreign government. And the United States ends up killing that leader. That's why we have to look at this dynamic of geopolitics. So with Walter Rodney doing how Europe underdeveloped Africa, he was attacked and killed for writing that work or doing that kind of work. Because he's trying to change the dynamics of how the structure of our continent and us as people are working together. So if we don't then take the time to do the work to make that happen, we will continually to be influenced and manipulated and out the game. And the game's going to change. How is it that China now has fast forwarded and now they're over in Africa doing all these things? The game has changed. After World War II, with Japanese being defeated, how they now control Panasonic, Mitsubishi, Nissan, how do they control all that? How does that happen? But Africa is still backwards. So I bet you, and we can say it here on the Pan-African Leadership Conference about documenting that, Ukraine will be redeveloped before anything happens in Africa. A war is going on right now. I bet you that place will be redeveloped before anything happens in Africa. That lets you know that there's an enterprise to keep Black people and those of melanin dominance in a hole. No one's going to save you. Dr. Clark used to always say, looking in the mirror, that's your only friend. That's your only friend.
Wow.
So we must re-educate ourselves, and it doesn't start by waiting someone else to tell you about your history. You better go gather it yourself.
Do for self. So you'll have a library to develop. Dr. Owens has pulled out, a plethora of books, right? So Walter Rodney is an author you need to look for. Who else? Let's go through that list because you just keep pulling them out.
Manning Marable. I mean, he
Manning Marable, yes.
Transformed that book, the topic to how capitalism undeveloped Black America. You know, Hugo Chavez. I mean, again, study Venezuela. United States government went ahead and had several coups against this brother. They had several coups against Castro. They always have a coup against someone who's going against the grain of the American empire. That's why I'm saying that enemy of my enemy is my friend. So we got to start looking at those power plays, the chess politics. You mentioned about economics of Claude Anderson, Powernomics, right? I mean, we got the list is there. And for those who don't have time to read, okay, fine, get to work. For those that are telling you about the dynamics, get to work. That means that whole, if you self-hatred, you haven't talked about him, but Amos Wilson passed away in the mid-90s, but Amos Wilson, Blueprint for Black Power. You know about that. I mean,
indeed.
Blueprint for Black Power, a moral and political and economic imperative for the 21st century. 800 pages. The brother already did the work. I think he should have got I don't want to say Nobel Peace Prize. There's other prizes that we should be given, but he's already done the work. So where are we at right now? Waiting for something to happen?
Right.
Nah, we have to he talked about self-hatred. I got that on another bookshelf there, but he has a book called Self-Defeat and Self-Hatred. I think they put that out after he had passed because, he has his own publishing company called African World Info Systems. They said you have your own platform here. Unless we have our own platforms, it's not going to happen.
It's going deep, right? So the work, the Blueprint to Black Power, as a matter of fact, I was finishing my dissertation, my doctoral work in D.C., and I had met Dr. Amos Wilson, and I told him that I was going to come and work with him on his latest project. I didn't know really what it was. Right. And so he had called me up when I was about to come, just get out of the doctoral program altogether. And spirit, because he did not know. We had one or two conversations when he came to DC. Right. He would not have known that I'd gone through a hellacious day on that day. And the phone call came through and he says, Brother Washington, you got to do this. And he gave me a list of things that I needed to do.
Awesome.
And then probably a month or so later, he made his transition, which I thought was powerful, right? The idea that brother drop seeds, like spirit gonna say, hey, do this. And then you just gonna just roll out on me. Come on, man. So but the point is that these scholars have laid out the points, the PowerPoints, the movements that we need to make, and we are afraid to do that, or something is happening. Maybe it is self-hatred, maybe it's something else. But we must recognize that the reason why the enemy continues to come after us and attack us is because they haven't won yet. And they haven't won because what they're coming against is more powerful than they. And they know this. How do we get the chance to know more about this? So, Dr. Moore, here we are to remind us, all of us, to keep reminding us about the power that's really within us. And how has your work elevated that particular consciousness? And what is the connection to melanin and super nutrients and this power to this political power? Share more about that.
Yeah, that's a lot of information packed in this little short time I had to spend with you. But the people all over the world reading my book have said it's helped them out to know a little more about themselves. It's only written in English, but we need to be in that space where we have our work in other languages. I spent time in Salvador, Brazil, and got a chance to speak at the Steve Biko Institute. And I was teaching the students about history and culture. And of course, they speak Portuguese, so they're trained to think like the Portuguese. So their mindset was not focused on what a Middle Passage was and what melanin is and how great they have been in the past before this issue of something called slavery or the imprisonment. So as I've gone around the world and people are interested in the work, I feel as though I've made a contribution. And so when I leave this planet, the legacy is still there for the work to be passed on. Because nothing that I've done is the epitome. It's what the stepping stone. I got a brother in England, named Leon Marshall. He wrote a book called, where's my book at? Called The Hidden Science of Melanin. And so for his book, he's kind of going off of what my work has done. I can't find it. But The Hidden Science of Melanin. Powerful brother. But he's taken my work to another level. So for me and reaching the community, it's all about understanding that without the melanin in the brain, you're not thinking properly. We have diseases that show when the melanin is deteriorating in your brain, you got some neurodegenerative problems. So when I'm saying when you can see a person and the problems that exist when the melanin is lacking, what happens when you pump up the volume? You start slamming basketballs like we do. You start running football. You start doing things on the soccer field like you just do dance. And look at gymnastics today, almost dominated by African women or melanin dominant women. Can't say just African, but in reality, we're all African. So we're talking about a scenario where the brain becomes the core. And without the brain functioning, nothing else happens. So we've already talked about incarceration with the mind, but look at the biology of it and the science. And no one's talking about superiority. We're just talking about the engines revving at a certain state that makes you what? Glide and go. Fastest, the quickest, all those things happen because of the way the brain operates. So as I get a chance to speak to people about that and document it, not from what I'm saying, but from the research. Someone's got to put it together. So I just put the research together for people to understand this.
Your work reminded me of something when I understood the power of coltan or tantalite.
Mm-hmm.
And it is the fastest conducting metal known to man, right? That's why they keep putting it in these cell phones and putting it into the computers. And I think about whatever is on the ground, under the ground was over the ground. And so when our bodies return to the earth, then whatever is in that metal is within us. And so your work just reminds me of the idea that we have this in us and the world recognizes this, but we don't recognize it.
No, not at all.
And so I thank you for that. So that's part of a lecture that I give, is that I draw it right back to your work. There it is, right? The Hidden Science of Melanin. Go ahead.
A brother over in England took my work, took it to another level. He has a whole academy. Since this is an international program here, platform, he has the hiddenscienceacademy.com. So he's promoting my work. So I'm here to promote his work. I got another sister. You asked about the whole perception on food items. She's written a book called Melanin Guide to Spiritual Awakening. She's also supported my work, and she's a nutritionist. People have done the work. It's what are we going to do to now make it manifest, to make it materialize? So as we start studying ourselves, we start to understand, guess what? I'm not just a jigaboo in a corner drinking a 40 ounce. I have more power. You know what? All these things we're seeing on the TV with the superheroes and all that, we're superheroes in real life. The story about Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King, Yaya Santiwa, those are superheroes in real life. So we start looking at studying the power of what people have done in the past, not just the beat downs that people have taken. You start standing a little bit differently. The Deacons for Defense, I got that down here somewhere. Deacons for Defense, Robert Williams, Negroes with Guns. When you start to see stories that say, you didn't get beat down all the time, that you actually stood up and fought, it changes your whole dynamic. The melanin recessive people aren't going to teach you that. I mean, that's why Dr. Carter G. Woodson, Miseducation of the Negro, I got that up there.
Got that one.
Yeah.
That's
Carter G. Woodson, Miseducation of the Negro, is explaining that, he he didn't want to stay in the school systems. He had to do something outside the school system because he saw what they were doing to keep people's minds shackled. So it's up to us to do that. We can't depend upon anybody else to tell us that.
You said melanin deficient people cannot teach us how to liberate ourselves.
They would
They're
not.
melanin deficient. That's it. That's it. Don't have it. And we keep looking to them to resolve issues. This is the Pan-African Leadership Center, where we talk about the issues of Pan-African reality, liberation, and the notion of knowing that we are a powerful people. Dr. Moore, there's a question here that says,
Yeah.
what is the greatest action or contribution or support that can benefit Africa either internally or externally? So I don't know if they can tie it into something, but I just want you to know that there is a conversation. Go ahead.
I see that one word, internal. Guess what? Internal reparations. We deal with reparations on the issue of other governments should be paying for what they have done to countries, from what Britain did to their empire to what happened with Haiti. Now they had to end up paying reparations to or fund France for what happened, but they should have gotten reparations. So internal reparations is the greatest action and contribution that can be done, because as you change yourself, everything around you changes. So I would focus on that first, because if you don't change, the circumstances around you aren't going to change. So let's focus on internal reparations.
Elaborate on that. I was working on something, right? The internal reparations.
Yeah.
Share more about that. That's it, right? That's
You
powerful.
ever heard of Mwata organization in the past? A brother named Ken Bridges. He and a couple of people took this topic of how do we get our money spent with us. So how do you do that first? Well, you gotta support yourself first. So the Mwata organization, and this brother, he was assassinated by that DC sniper. Wow. He was assassinated. There was like 20 people killed. He happened to be one of them. I don't know. I just have to ask the question. How did he happen to be in Virginia? He's from Pennsylvania. He had to get assassinated. But he pushed internal reparations because he was talking about how we need to change internally first to appreciate us to be able to support African initiatives. How are you going to support African initiatives if you don't like Africa? You don't like black people. You're going to run from yourself. So that's why I wrote an article called A Blueprint Power Analysis of the Buffoonery of Black Conservatives. So
say the title again. Say that was a good one.
It's Journal of African Studies. You can check it out. I wrote it in 2013, but A Blueprint Power Analysis of the Buffoonery of Black Conservatives. As Dr. Wilson would always talk, what are you conserving? What is a black and being conservative? We got some problems. You can't be conserving. We have to get out of this. But they're utilized by the system with their polysyllabic terminology and they're great orators, but those people are propped up but not doing the work in the community. I'm not saying anything bad about those that work at PWIs. I mean, that's where they want to work. But then it's like you're in that situation, and then how do you now talk about the one who's funding you or paying you? It's kind of the challenge. So the HBCU experience and the opportunities to have this Pan-African Leadership Center. You got the brother you interviewed him over in Ghana, Cambone, right? Doing his own thing over there. We have the templates. How do we now make it manifest? It starts with internal reparations. If you don't appreciate and love yourself, how are you going to support yourself?
You said, for those who may not be familiar, we talk about PWIs, which is predominantly white institutions in the United States, and HBCUs, is historically black colleges and universities. And there's a legacy of these institutions starting HBCUs, and many of them started out of the desires, the interest, and the intellect of African people, realizing that they had the capacity to learn in a space where Europeans were saying that they were ineducable. Many of them began to expand after what was called the Mohawk Conference of 1890, and the preamble of the Mohawk Conference, if I could call it such, suggested that slavery moved the savage African up the ascent of humanity, and that to educate him would be further up that ascent. And so even the thinking of that particular Mohawk Conference was jacked up. But W.B. Du Bois says that in this country, in the United States, largely the idea of public education for all is a Negro idea, and it comes from the ancient understanding of African people about the capacity to learn and to know as well as to be. So in reality, the foundation of education in this country not only is predicated on the immediate conversation of African people that were incarcerated in this space, but also we know that the liberating arts comes out of the ancient conversation of ancient Kemet. So the point I want to make sure that everybody understands that HBCU and what it is and what's happening, that these are black schools that started. Many of them were was bought, land was procured by enslaved Africans to start it. Prairie View A&M University was a plantation that the plantation owner's wife gave the land to the enslaved to do. Actually, they didn't give it to them; they actually had worked for it, right? But had turned over the land for them to be educated. So many of our centers or spaces where we educated in this space in the United States are spaces that were liberated by African people trying to working to carve out a space to further develop the minds of brilliant people. However, most of the so-called PWIs were was part of a land grant process, the Morrill Act, that gave them land. Penn State and other places that gave them land that was stolen from Native Americans. So think about the idea of a self-determining people saying, we will affirm who we are, we will educate ourselves, we will elevate ourselves, and we will start our own institutions, whereas Europeans, white folks, were given land that was stolen from the indigenous population. And then they want to suggest then that people of African descent are on welfare. And as a matter of fact, they're the benefactors of procured stolen property, stolen goods, thieves. And that was a welfare system that gave them much of what they call their systems of operation. Just want to toss it out there so people can be clear about what we're talking about. You know what, and this was not on the list, and you can not talk about it, but there was this white guy at Tennessee State University that actually yelled out at a black student, and I was curious. I asked my students about what they thought about it and how they were not able to delve into the conversation because I think that we're afraid of the race conversation. But I want you to share something, if you have some thoughts about this conversation about this white male at a HBCU talking down a black person, a black student, and on top of that, how this behavior is often protected in our
Right.
HBCUs because of something.
Yeah, I did see that interesting dynamic. I would like to, since we're dealing with Pan African, though, my experience. When I was in Brazil, I spoke at the Steve Biko Institute. Now, Steve Biko's from South Africa. South Africa is not South America. South Africa is on the bottom of Africa. So the people in Brazil appreciated enough of what Steve Biko did as a Pan-Africanist there in South Africa, because you know one of the most powerful quotes from Steve Biko is that the most powerful tool in the hands of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed. So the people in Brazil never been to South Africa to meet Steve Biko's or that whole family. So when I was in Brazil, I made the connections. And then when I went to South Africa, I actually got a chance to meet Winnie Mandela and her family. Why? Because her granddaughter was in my class, Zazawe. Wow. So when I went to go to South Africa, and she said, hey, you want to meet my grandmother? I didn't know that was a grandmother when she was as a student in my class. So I then got a chance to meet the family, and I told them about me working in Brazil at the Steve Biko Institute, and they didn't know nothing about that. So I made the connection for Steve Biko's son to go to give a anniversary address in Brazil. That's the connection of us controlling our institutions. In Brazil, they don't have an opportunity to have HBCUs. They could. There's a brother named Joe Beasley who has an institute there in, I think, like not Sao Paulo, but another school that he's provided money that's almost like an HBCU. But the melanin dominant people there in Brazil don't have easy access to going to the university systems. So the Steve Biko Institute was created to help them to do better on the test to get into the university system. But if they had their own HBCUs over there, it wouldn't be a problem. But Brazil has fought affirmative action. They got rid of affirmative action. Guess what? We're dealing with the same argument right now in the United States. So when you say there's a white professor that was screaming at their student, some people feel privileged that these little students, I don't give them negative names, they can't learn anyway. So they feel privileged to be able to do anything in that environment. And so many of our HBCUs are no longer HBCUs in the tradition of them being controlled and dominated by us. So when you have infiltrators coming in, those dynamics can happen where you saw that situation where that professor was doing that for years. Just happened to be on what tape now because people can now video anything. But some people have had a privilege to think that they can tell anybody what to do. And from a oppressive mentality, that's what I'm saying. When Steve Biko said the most powerful tool in the hands of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed. So when white people are able to teach you that you've done nothing, you have no history, you know what I mean? The brother from England, you heard of Robert Williams? He wrote a book called Walker, rather. When We Ruled.
Wow. Yes, sir.
Dictates. He's doing that over in England, which means someone in Africa can do it. Theophile Benga. You know what I mean? Taking Sheikh Anta Diop's work to another level. We've already had Ivan Van Sertima here, who's influenced Runoko Rashidi, who may his soul rest in peace. A lot of our scholars are gone, but they've done the work already. So we can't wait on those who don't look like us to teach us correctly.
This is the Pan-African Leadership Center. Viantre Petty has entered into the space. He's also a student of ours at Grambling State University, moving through, making some things happen. And he talks about the issue of freedom of speech, and he knows about the dynamics that happened there. And the reason why it's Pan-African conversations, because we know that many of the Pan-Africanists came to our institutions, came to the United States to study. We know about Kwame Nkrumah coming to study, and others came to the United States, and they saw something, and they were inspired by the powerful works. And then we have others in the space disrupting that elevation. And so we have to be vigilant about that, because then I think it's an act of self-hatred that we don't speak out more about these issues, about who we are. We don't see ourselves as a global people. We see ourselves as simply being Negroes, still dealing with the issue of plantation life. And so this is why this is critical. Dr. Moore is here with us. A scholar. He says that we are covering a lot of territory. It's all about the same thing, about the power of knowing who you are. And when you know who you are, you do differently. And his work is centered around melanin, and how we have this chemical within our bodies that we have been attacked for, because people don't have it. People have gone out and tried to get it, try to make it appear in their skin. They've gotten skin cancer and all kind of things, trying to figure out how to master the various elements of melanin, the neuromelanin and other parts of other types of melanin that exist. And so it's important to know that when you walk with the power that we have, it is intimidating to those that don't seem to have that same type of power. Not better than. They're simply saying that there's a unique power. And so you mentioned also that we don't have to go look for the superheroes. We have to find the made up one, because we have them living among us. I do want to articulate that even in their myth, their conversation about a Wakanda discourse, there is a truth inside of that myth. That there is this power, this conceptual power, and so even their myth acknowledges something, the truth. We have to know both their truth or the myths, but also understand our truth. So, Dr. Moore, this is it on you. You can take it anywhere you want to go. The next 5 minutes of just anything that you want to talk about is shared that pulls this package together in a way that makes sense to you, because people are just writing in right now. I can't even keep up. Go ahead.
Well, the whole issue of consciousness, I mean, that's what life is about. And there's a general universal consciousness out there, but how do you tap into that? So many of our scholars and many historians and many people from different cultures have dealt with issue of meditation, yoga, ways that you can channel your body to reach that divine universal consciousness. Well, the body is the vehicle to do that. So on a science level, because we didn't, emphasize any science in this discussion, because we're going to make it plain for people to understand. That's why Malcolm X was always a powerful brother. He made it plain for you to understand. So the science of our bodies is what channels us to this universal consciousness. Well, that's about peace and love and being equal, but we're dealing with a system. The Pale Fox, written by Grill and Dieterlin, about the Dogon people, but the pale fox, about this entity that has just created havoc all over the world. Another book by this brother named, actually a Native American writer, Jack Forbes, wrote a book called Columbus and Other Cannibals. So there's entities out there that are hindering us from being able to be at peace to live for divine universal consciousness. But just consciousness first is just an awareness of your surroundings. And if you are being taught to be other than who you are, there's no way you can have the right consciousness to what move in the right direction. You will always be controlled, manipulated. You talked about the issue of resources. If you watch that movie Avatar and you look at the mineral resource that the so-called sky people coming down to get, what was it? It was called unobtainium. That's a powerful concept. Even though it's done by a white man in terms of creating the images, even those people in the Avatar are little blue people with dreadlocks. You know, there's African people. They got a baobab tree there. They got the tree of life. That's African people. They talked about these people in Avatar having this pigmentation, not pigmentation, this polymer that makes them move and makes them real agile. But the reality of the resource that those Europeans were going in there, those sky people trying to get, was called unobtainium. You talk about Africa with the cell phones. Without the coltan, cell phones don't work. So resources, when you have the right resources mentally, you can elevate and grow and build and do whatever you want. When you're being miseducated and taken away from what your reality really is, guess what? Your consciousness can never grow. Your awareness will be centered around what someone else is telling you to think. That's why it's up to us. So with this Pan-African, leadership center, Pan, many of my students don't know what Pan means. It keeps like Pan-Hellenic, try to stay into the Greek organizations, not African organizations, but Greek organizations. Pan means together. We must focus on what our African ancestors talked about. Africa must unite. Kwame Nkrumah said it. Kwame Nkrumah, he wrote like 30 books. When I went to the Ghana Center, or the Kwame Nkrumah Center in Ghana, and I saw all the stuff that was in there, man, they even had this old mirror from Lincoln University where I went. It's like, I know they don't have no mirror or dresser or something that I used when I was there. So how do they actually do that? But he was well respected throughout the world as a Pan-Africanist. We have to focus on that. Muammar Gaddafi had the little green book about how we now need to make United States of Africa. So you have many scholars that have been there for us to say and what to do, but we got entities that we're not sophisticated enough to know how they'll attack you, because it's all about what? The resources, money, and economics. Some people, you've talked about that as a psychologist with other presenters, but that whole dynamic of what's important to you. The axiological reference point for Europeans is material and things, not people. That's why gentrification is a problem now in many communities and environments, because they're now wiping the people out to get that property. People versus property. So from a European or melanin recessive standpoint, it's going to be about things and material. African people or people who are melanin dominant are living to be socially oriented and together. And so we've been manipulated to a point where it's just hard this day and age. And so when we start looking at science principles and start looking at melanin, guess what? Melanin is a biological element that absorbs and takes in. It harnesses energy. And that's what we need to do as Black people, as African people, as melanin dominant people on the planet. Harness this energy to be able to take our life and our world to a whole nother level. Again, build pyramids again. If you ever visited Kemet, you've seen it. You look at it. How did they do this? Guess what? We can do it again.
Brother, that's it, right? We must recognize that we are people of greatness, that we have within us, as Fukuyama says, the biogenetic rope, that we are seed of a seed of a seed of a seed of a seed of the seed, that is what is within us. And so that genius has never died down. It's simply our awareness of it has been diminished. So we have to recognize that. Viantre says, book. I'm not quite sure, Viantre, which book you wanted to see. Again, if you can type that in, we can respond to that. But Dr. Moore, again, a scholar who's inspired many, has moved many. I know he's moved me to get back to the readings of some books that I have walked away from. I got to go back and return to a few, and I got to pick up some more. But I've been impacted recently by this book here about Africanisms in America. I thought that was so interesting to actually see and hear the various things that we have done as an African people, like the certain words that are utilized in this space. Okay, I've always asked the question, "What is okay?" And you know that it's a Mandinga word that talks about the issue of everything is copacetic. The idea of swag, the terminology comes from African people, right? And so we don't recognize all this stuff as a part of who we are. We also have the brother here talking about spirituality and beyond, Professor Kaba talks about these various elements of understanding spirituality and beyond, and the movement that occurs in the people. You mentioned Brother Bynum, and so this is a book that we're looking through now. Probably won't show up because of the
Life. Got it.
yeah,
That on the shelf too. Yes.
yes. I know you got it all. I know it's there. I'm just saying that. So this is important for our people to be able to understand that the power to absorb this intellect, the power to not only absorb it, but to be able to manipulate the matter around us to create the unthinkable is also here. That's the idea of the pyramids. And if we don't know that we have that power, then we believe that we do, that we simply are niggas, bitches, and hoes, and we're more than that. We've seen them. You talked about Avatar, exactly right, right? The Navi. The Navi got to be African people, right? Between the Navi being African and the indigenous population to this land, I mean, that's nothing else that you could talk about that has that kind of power. So even in their myths, they show that they are afraid of the power within African people. The whole conversation around King Kong, the big black brute that comes to get the white damsel. The issue is that that is a power of Africa that can destroy all that is great and wonderful within the European world. So this is it. So what Viantre says, what is a book that expels the tactics of the enemy? I don't know quite what was happening. Abin Kizier, Duku Mazini. Oh man, wow. Okay. My good brother, I'm not sure if he's still in Ghana, but he left the U.S. and started teaching in Dar es Salaam, I believe. But the brother is really a heavy brother. But go ahead.
But that Dr. Welsing focused on Neely Full's work, a United Compensatory Code System for Studying White Supremacy. I got it on here, but that book, if she's asking what can be done to decode, Neely Fuller, Neely, Neely Fuller, Fuller. On YouTube, people have taken his work from his chapters and done like little cartoons on it to kind of break that down for us. So Neely Fuller's work would be definitely a book to address what the sister asked about. The when you said gene of a gene or seed of a seed of a seed, so my next work is going to be on epigenetics and genomics. And the word gene, you know what a gene is? It's nothing but encapsulated memory. Encapsulated memory.
Yes, sir.
That means in that gene is everything we've done.
Yes, sir.
That's why when you go to Kemet and those people that are there taking you on the tours of the pyramids, they didn't build those pyramids. They're not the people. There's not their genes. So when we come back, they're like, "Oh, brother, welcome back," because they know we're the ones that were in that hot ASS sun. You can't be light in a hot ass sun and work. Those were African or black or Nubian or asphalt black people that were doing and building that. So in the genes is an encapsulated memory of everything we've done. And the oppressor and the colonization has done everything to squash that out of your genes. But it can't be squashed. Because when you look at everything we've done about how we've been organizing and doing things, and it just comes out that we keep growing despite there's no reason we shouldn't even be on the planet from what happened to us with this Ma'afa. We shouldn't even be here. So as the brother said, Amos Wilson emphasized, encapsulated memory is what genes are all about.
Mm, Epigenetics, epigenetics, right? There's people need to understand, right? So epigenetics. I mean, we were supposed to close out 3 minutes ago, anyway. But this is good. We're gonna press forward just a minute or two more. Epigenetics is important to understand that inside of the gene is the memory of how to respond, what has happened, what has occurred. There's this research done by Diaz and Resler that had the mice that had the whiff of the orange blossom, and then they would be shocked. And so these mice associated the trauma of the shock with the smell that they encountered, and then these mice would have pups, and the pups would have the whiff of the orange blossom, but not have the shock, and their bodies would have a visceral response. These pups would grow up, and they would have pups and have the orange blossom smell, and these also had a visceral response to that particular trauma, though they had never been shocked. So inside of the gene is a memory, and the memory teaches a great deal. But also, Resler said that there's a way to teach the mice how to respond to that, and that becomes encoded genetically. And so they show the opposite, that the mice that had been traumatized and by the smell begin to be taught how to resolve this particular trauma response, and that response to the trauma was passed down genetically. This is a moment of how do you respond to the trauma, and how do we then code what has been coded? How do we refashion that? We've learned a great deal from our ancestors, and now so we're just going to add to that conversation. So that's a powerful bit of work. Go ahead.
I'll just boomerang it back to you, because you're the one that deals with persistent enslavement systemic trauma. I mean, it's a pest that keeps bothering us because we're not dealing with, as you said, epigenetics, all these factors. It kind of explains why we're fearful of things. On the issue of the European or the oppressor, explains why they're fearful of you. So yeah, epigenetics, all I'm saying is that's where the next level of research will be going with my work, is to look at the genome, what's really going on with this entrenched fear, or really not even fear, but elegance. You know what I mean? How do we rise above rather than always being at this level? You know what I mean? We seasick. Students all getting C's, man. We need to be somebody and get some A's and say amen. But we seasick. You know what I mean? We need to look at ways to grow and develop. So in our genes is all that. You can't know that unless you're taught that.
Brother, that is I mean, I want to keep you around longer, brother, because that's on point. We got to Dr. Moore, we got to continue the conversation. The Pan-African Leadership Center, a preeminent scholar, Dr. T. Owens Moore, has talked about Melanin, has talked about the consciousness element, talked about the power that is within, how do we tap into it, and is moving into the conversation of how do we recode our DNA. We recognize that we are the seed of a seed of a seed of a seed of the seed, that we recognize that people have come to attack and assault the African genius, and we have the moment to resurrect that genius, to move it forward. And we have brothers like Dr. Moore reminding us that the power that we have is within us, and we have to bring it without to create a new reality. This reality is one that is up to us to do, not to wait on the oppressor. It is an idea of doing for self. Pan-African Leadership Center is just about that conversation. So I thank all of those who have come in, who have joined us, who have come to have the conversation. I want to thank Dr. Moore for his brilliant insight and willingness to do this at this time. I want to thank all those who tapped in. Abikenzie, you need to respond to the email. You need to be on this conversation. You need to hear from this brother. He's heavy. So we will have them. As a matter of fact, we should just put 2 or 3 of y'all at the same time and just have a real good conversation about the African world. Viantre, thank you for joining in, Dr. Flager, and others for being a part of this conversation. Dr. Moore, you want to leave us with something that we can hold on to, a nugget, and we will close with you.
Nuggets, kernels. All I got to say is that more power to you, my brother, for being a conduit to make this work. You said that other people have been involved in making this platform available for us, but much love and respect to you. And I would just say asante sana to my people. We will win.